It was the summer of 1974, a season when the mountains seemed endless, the lakes were clear as glass, and the nights echoed with the laughter of young campers. Four teenagers, full of restless energy and plans for the future, set out on what was meant to be an ordinary trip into the woods. They carried sleeping bags, borrowed tents, and the kind of fearless excitement only the young can truly feel. But they never came back. Their families waited by the phone, sleepless and desperate, clinging to the hope that the kids had simply lost their way. Search teams combed the forest, helicopters swept the treetops, and dogs followed faint trails that vanished at the edge of a stream. Days turned into weeks, then months. The story slipped from headlines, but not from the memories of a community left unsettled by their disappearance. For decades, rumors swirled. Some said the teens ran away. Others whispered of something darker hidden deep in the mountains, a presence that did not want to be found. And then, nearly half a century later, a chance discovery changed everything. Hunters stumbled upon a cabin, long hidden by vines and shadows. Inside, the air was thick with dust, silence, and secrets frozen in time. What they found there would reopen a case thought long forgotten and finally reveal the chilling truth about what happened to those campers in the summer of 1974. The missing teenagers were not strangers to the woods. Each of them grew up in the small mountain town that sat just outside the boundaries of the Smoky Wilderness. It was a quiet place where families knew each other by name, where the diner on Main Street closed early on Sundays, and where every summer brought the same ritual of packing up tents and canoes for a weekend outdoors. The first was Michael Harper, 17 years old, tall and broad-shouldered, known for the way he always carried a baseball glove under his arm. Michael was the leader of the group, the one who suggested they should head further into the woods than they ever had before. His friends trusted him. After all, Michael had a calm confidence that made others feel safe, even in the wild. Then there was Jenny Clark, 16. Quiet but sharp-eyed. She was the one who brought along a worn leather journal, vowing to record every detail of their adventure. Her parents later said she loved stories more than anything, that she always dreamed of writing a book about the mountains she grew up in. Robert "Bobby" Hughes, also 17, was the joker of the group. With his shaggy hair and mischievous grin, he never let a day pass without pulling a prank or making his friends laugh, until they couldn't breathe. But Bobby also had a curious streak. He liked poking into old barns, caves, and ruins, places others avoided. And finally, there was Sarah Miller, just 15, the youngest of them all. She was Michael's cousin, tagging along with the older teens. She had begged to be included, and after much convincing, the others had agreed. Sarah was bright, spirited, and fearless, often rushing ahead on trails without a second thought. The town watched the four set out that Friday morning, their packs heavy with food and gear, their spirits high. They waved goodbye, promising to be back by Sunday evening. For the families, it was just another summer trip. For the teens, it was freedom, a taste of independence in the vast wilderness. The Smoky Mountains themselves were like another character in this story. Towering ridges rolled endlessly into the horizon, cloaked in mist that clung like breath on a cold morning. Streams cut through the valleys, and hidden caves dotted the hillsides. Locals spoke of the forest with a mixture of awe and unease, as though it were alive, watching, listening, sometimes swallowing things whole. At night, the mountains were darker than any of the teens had ever known. The stars burned bright overhead. But beneath the trees, the air was thick and black, filled with strange calls and movements in the brush. It was a place where directions blurred, where a wrong turn could lead you miles away from safety. And yet, to the four campers, it was simply adventure. They carried their laughter into the trees, unaware that the mountains had been keeping secrets for centuries, and that their footsteps were leading them toward something no one in town would forget. When Sunday evening arrived and the campers did not return, the families were not immediately alarmed. It wasn't unusual for young people to lose track of time in the woods. Maybe they had decided to camp one more night, Maybe the trail had taken longer than they expected. But by Monday morning, when school buses rolled through town without Michael, Jenny, Bobby, or Sarah aboard, worry began to grow into fear. The first call to the sheriff's office came before noon. By that afternoon, deputies and park rangers were on the trail where the teens had last been seen. At first, the search seemed hopeful. They expected to find a group of tired but embarrassed campers, perhaps stranded with a broken tent pole or an empty food bag. But as the hours stretched on, something more unsettling emerged. There were no fresh tracks, no footprints leading back toward town, no sign of a fire or campsite along the routes they should have traveled. By Tuesday, hundreds of volunteers had joined the effort. Helicopters circled overhead, their rotors echoing through the valleys. Bloodhounds were brought in, and for a brief moment hope surged when one of the dogs caught a scent near a fork in the trail. But the lead ended abruptly at a rocky creek bed, where the water ran fast and cold. The dog stopped, confused, and would not pick up the trail again. Investigators began piecing together what little they knew. The group had been well prepared. Food for 3 days, tents, sleeping bags, a map, even a small first aid kit. Michael was an experienced hiker, and Jenny's journal, which was later found in her room, was filled with detailed notes about their planned route. Nothing suggested recklessness. Still, suspicions spread quickly. Some whispered that the teens had staged their disappearance, running off to start a new life somewhere far away. But that theory faltered almost immediately. None of them had taken money, extra clothing, or even their favorite belongings. Their bedrooms remained untouched. Jenny's beloved typewriter still sat on her desk, half a story left unfinished. Others wondered about foul play. Could they have crossed paths with a stranger in the woods? In the mid-1972nd, stories of hitchhikers gone missing and unsolved murders along highways were already fueling fear. Deputies interviewed hunters, drifters, and even a group of men camping nearby. No leads surfaced. Everyone questioned, claimed they had seen nothing unusual. There were also darker rumors, ones tied to the mountains themselves. Locals spoke of old cabins hidden deep in the trees, places built long ago by hermits or outlaws. Some believed people still lived there, off the grid, far from law or community. A few whispered of strange lights seen at night, or of voices echoing through valleys where no one was supposed to be. For investigators, these stories were frustrating. They blurred fact and folklore, making it impossible to know what was real and what was simply fear feeding on silence. One clue, however, stood out. Midweek, searchers stumbled upon a fire ring in a clearing several miles off the expected trail. The ashes were cold, but nearby lay scraps of food wrappers, the same brand Jenny's parents had packed in her bag. It suggested the group had veered far from their intended path. But why? Had they gotten lost? Or had something or someone led them there? Despite the discovery, the trail went cold. By the end of the second week, the search had expanded to nearly 30 square miles. Flyers plastered towns across the state. Families offered rewards. Reporters arrived, filling the nightly news with images of tired volunteers trudging through the underbrush. Yet, no trace of the teenagers appeared. No bodies, no gear, not even a shoe. It was as if the forest had swallowed them whole. And then came the rumors that unsettled the entire investigation. A hunter, making his way through the northern ridge, claimed he saw strange carvings on a tree trunk, symbols he did not recognize. Another man said he found animal bones arranged in a circle not far from where the campers were believed to have traveled. None of this was officially confirmed, but whispers grew that what happened was not a simple accident. By the end of the summer, the sheriff's office admitted what no one wanted to hear. There were no more leads. The case went cold, and with it came a silence heavier than the mist that clung to the Smoky Mountains. Families waited, year after year, holding on to photographs that never aged, wondering what had truly happened during those vanished days in 1974. Years slipped by, and with them, the case of the missing teenagers faded from the forefront of the public's mind. In the weeks after their disappearance, Newspapers ran headline after headline, speculating on what might have happened in those woods. Parents across the county warned their children not to wander too far, and whispers of danger hung heavy over the community. But as months turned into years, those whispers quieted, replaced by new stories, new scandals, new tragedies. Life, as it often does, moved on. For the families of the missing, however, time did not heal. Each birthday, each holiday, was a reminder of the empty seats at the table. The parents clung to the hope that perhaps their children had run away, perhaps they were still alive somewhere, hidden but breathing. That fragile hope, though, dimmed a little more with every passing year. Detectives who had once pored over maps and searched the woods eventually retired. The case files grew thick with notes, statements, and tips, but no definitive answers. By the late 1982nd, the disappearance of the teen campers was labeled a cold case. For law enforcement, it was one mystery among many unsolved, but no longer actively pursued. And yet, the legend of the vanished teenagers lingered. Around campfires, hikers would retell the story, embellishing it with ghostly sightings and sinister theories. Some claimed the woods were cursed, that anyone who wandered too deep risked joining the campers in eternal silence. Others whispered about strangers in the forest, drifters, hermits, perhaps even a secret cult. In truth, no one knew. But the mystery became part of the Smoky Mountains folklore, woven into the very fabric of the community. For the families, though, it was not folklore. It was an open wound, one that refused to close. Decades later, when the world had all but forgotten the case, a strange discovery would drag the story back into the light, hidden deep in the forest, in a place no search party had ever reached. A decaying structure lay waiting, and within it answers, long concealed, ready to rewrite everything that had once been believed about what really happened in the summer of 1974. For nearly 3 decades, the disappearance of the teen campers remained nothing more than an unsolved mystery. Families had grown older, siblings had married, and parents had passed away, still clutching faded photographs of their children, never knowing what became of them. The case files collected dust in the county archives, rarely touched except by curious journalists or cold case enthusiasts who stumbled across the story. But in the early 2000s, a shift occurred, one small, almost accidental discovery that would eventually reignite the case. It began with a group of surveyors hired to chart a remote section of forest deep within the Smoky Mountains. Their job was routine: mark boundaries, map terrain, and note any unusual land features. But what they stumbled upon was anything but routine. After hours of navigating through overgrown brush and steep ridges, they found the faint outline of a path, almost hidden under decades of fallen leaves and vines. Out of curiosity, they followed it. The path wound deeper into the woods until it revealed something no one expected: the crumbling remains of a small cabin. It wasn't listed on any maps. There were no records of its construction, no signs it had ever been part of official park property. The cabin was isolated, weather-beaten, and eerily silent, as though it had been deliberately concealed. Inside, the surveyors discovered evidence that someone had once lived there: old tin cans, rusted tools, and a broken lantern. But it was what lay beneath a rotting wooden floorboard that unsettled them most. Scraps of weathered fabric, unmistakably from clothing, alongside fragments of yellowed paper that appeared to be pages from a notebook. Fearing they had uncovered something linked to the long-forgotten case, they alerted authorities. When investigators arrived, they quickly realized the significance. The notebook pages, though faded, contained names that matched the missing campers. One line read almost like a plea: "We can't get out. Someone is watching." Suddenly, a case that had been cold for nearly 30 years was thrust back into the spotlight. Local newspapers ran headlines once more, and television crews arrived in town. Families who had quietly endured decades of silence were once again confronted with the possibility that answers might finally be within reach. The discovery prompted a massive search of the surrounding area. Cadaver dogs were brought in, and forensic teams combed through every inch of the abandoned cabin and the land around it. Then, deep in the swampy ground not far from the structure, another clue surfaced. A rusted safe, partially submerged, its contents sealed tight after decades in the water. The safe was hauled out and opened under careful conditions. Inside were more notebooks, photographs, and strange, ritualistic objects coated in resin. Some of the photos appeared to show the missing teens, though blurred and distorted by water damage. The resin-coated objects hinted at something darker, possible evidence of ceremonies, or perhaps an attempt to preserve what had once been alive. This was no longer just a missing persons case. Investigators now faced the possibility that the teenagers had stumbled into something far more sinister, something that had been hidden for decades in the Smoky Mountains. For the first time in years, law enforcement dedicated new resources to the case. Cold case detectives, forensic specialists, and even outside consultants pored over the evidence. Rumors swirled in the community once again. Some whispered about secret societies operating in the forest, while others suggested the teens may have been held against their will in the hidden cabin before meeting a tragic end. The biggest revelation, however, came when forensic experts managed to recover partial fingerprints from the resin-sealed objects. Though degraded, they pointed toward individuals who had once lived in the area but had since vanished themselves. These leads raised more questions than answers. Who were these people? And what connection did they have to the teenagers who disappeared in 1974? The families, now decades older, watched all of this unfold with a complicated mix of hope and dread. They wanted answers, but they feared what those answers might reveal. For them, the reopening of the case meant reopening old wounds that had never truly healed. Still, there was no denying it. After years of silence, the Smoky Mountains were speaking again. And this time, the clues pointed toward a chilling truth, long buried under layers of moss, soil, and secrecy. What investigators didn't yet know was that the hidden cabin and the rusted safe were only the beginning. The real breakthrough, the one that would finally unravel the decades-old mystery, was still waiting in the shadows, deep in the heart of the forest. The discovery of the hidden cabin and the safe electrified both investigators and the public. But what came next began to peel back the layers of mystery that had cloaked the case for nearly 3 decades. Forensic analysts spent months carefully drying and examining the water-damaged notebooks. Though many pages were ruined, others revealed fragments of thoughts, sentences, and sketches that slowly formed a disturbing picture. The notebooks appeared to be journals written not by one of the missing teenagers, but by someone else entirely. The handwriting was uneven, sometimes frantic, often scrawled in the margins. Entries referenced visitors who wandered too close, and cryptic notes about keeping them here until the forest decides. One page even listed dates, some of which matched the time the campers vanished. Investigators also found eerie sketches of figures standing in circles surrounded by trees. In the corner of one page was a chilling note. They scream at night, but the forest keeps their secrets. The more analysts pieced together, the clearer it became someone had kept the teenagers there, possibly for days, maybe longer. The evidence didn't prove their ultimate fate, but it suggested captivity. A major turning point came when DNA analysis was performed on the fabric scraps recovered from beneath the cabin floor. Technology had advanced dramatically since the 1972nd, and results confirmed what many feared. The fabric carried traces of biological material from at least 2 of the missing teens. It was the first physical link connecting them directly to that location. For families, this revelation was bittersweet. After years of silence, there was confirmation their loved ones had been there, but it also meant the likelihood of their survival had grown slimmer. Investigators didn't stop there. They expanded the search to surrounding areas, using ground-penetrating radar. What they uncovered was unsettling. Signs of shallow disturbances in the soil, possible grave sites. Although excavation was difficult due to decades of erosion and shifting terrain, fragments of bone were eventually unearthed. Some were too damaged for immediate identification, but DNA once again provided answers. At least one set of remains matched one of the missing campers. The truth was no longer just whispered in fragments of notebooks, it was being confirmed by science. Yet, the biggest breakthrough came not from the ground, but from historical records. A team of archivists combed through county deeds and property maps and uncovered a startling fact. The land where the cabin stood had once been leased in the 1962nd by a man with a troubling history. He was known locally as a recluse, a survivalist who avoided townsfolk and was rumored to have strange rituals in the woods. Police records from that time revealed he had once been questioned in connection with a different missing persons case, but no charges were ever filed. By cross-referencing fingerprints lifted from the resonate-coated objects with these old records, investigators made a match. The prints belonged to this man, who had died in the late 1982nd. His name, though long forgotten by most in the community, suddenly resurfaced as the central figure in one of the darkest mysteries the Smoky Mountains had ever seen. The working theory began to form. The teenagers, while camping, had stumbled across something they weren't supposed to see, perhaps the secluded cabin or some ritual the man conducted. Instead of letting them go, he had held them captive. What happened afterward was still uncertain, but the evidence strongly suggested their lives ended in those woods. Local residents reacted with a mix of relief and horror. Relief because the decades-long silence was finally cracking open. Horror because it confirmed their worst fears that something sinister had lurked in their own backyard all along. For the families, the revelations brought both clarity and sorrow. They now had fragments of the truth, though the full story remained forever out of reach. At last, they could put some of the questions to rest, even if the answers carried unbearable weight. Still, the case was not fully closed. Investigators believed there might have been others involved. Traces of additional fingerprints hinted at more than one person living or operating near the cabin. Were the teenagers' disappearances the work of a single disturbed man, or part of something larger, perhaps even a group? That question kept the mystery alive. What became clear was this: the forest had held its secrets for decades, but with persistence, science, and a stroke of luck, the truth had begun to emerge. And as haunting as it was, it proved one thing: no matter how deep a secret is buried, time has a way of uncovering it. As the investigation finally drew to its close, the Smoky Mountains seemed quieter, as if the forest itself had sighed with the release of a long-held secret. Families of the lost campers gathered at a memorial site near the trailhead, where flowers, photographs, and candles formed a small circle of remembrance. For many, it was the first time they had a place to say goodbye. The truth that had surfaced was far from complete. Not every detail of those final days could be known, and not every question found its answer. But fragments of truth journals, bones, DNA, and the shadow of a man who once lived in the woods were enough to confirm that the teenager's disappearance was not an accident. It was the result of human darkness, hidden in the wilderness for years. For the community, the revelations carried a sobering lesson. They had spent decades living beside a mystery, whispering stories about spirits, curses, and restless souls. In the end, what they discovered was something far more ordinary, yet infinitely more chilling: that the true danger had been human all along. As investigators closed the files, one thought lingered. Nature can be harsh, unpredictable, even deadly. But what it hides most carefully are the choices people make in its shadows. The forest had been a witness, silent but patient, until time and persistence forced it to surrender its secrets. For the families, grief remained, but so did a fragile sense of closure. They could finally speak their loved ones' names, not as missing, but as remembered. Though the mystery had taken decades to unravel, it left behind a truth that mattered. Silence does not erase memory, and secrets cannot stay buried forever. And perhaps that is the message for all who listen to stories like these. Disappearances are never just about what was lost. They are also about what remains. About the determination of those who refuse to stop asking questions. About the way truth, however delayed, has the power to cut through even the deepest silence. In the end, the forest keeps its mysteries. But for the families of those teenagers, the long wait had ended, and their voices had finally been heard. Stories like this remind us that time doesn't always erase the truth, it only hides it. And somewhere, in forgotten woods, in quiet towns, or deep in old case files, more secrets are still waiting to be uncovered. If you want to walk with us into those mysteries, don't forget to subscribe to Last Seen. Each episode is another chance to retrace the steps, follow the clues, and bring the unknown a little closer to the light.